I didn't find out I'd been modernized in a meeting. I found out in a word. It wasn't on a slide. It wasn't said out loud. It wasn't even meant for me to see. But it was there, inside an HR system next to my name, like a quiet verdict someone had already stamped and filed away. Obsolete. 20 years of my life reduced to a tag in a drop-down menu. The morning it happened started like most mornings in my world. Early, routine, predictable. Coffee at the same time. Badge scan at the same door. The same hallway smell of printer toner and burnt espresso. I was the guy who arrived before the lights fully warmed up. Because after 2 decades in operations, my brain didn't have an off switch. I wasn't chasing titles. I wasn't chasing applause. I was chasing stability. Clean handoffs. Processes that didn't break when someone got promoted or quit or decided they were too busy for the details. People don't notice those things until they disappear. That week, there was a new buzz around the building. Not panic, exactly. More like a nervous excitement people put on when leadership starts using words like transformation. The calendar invites started coming in with the same theme. Modernization, future state, alignment, operating model. You learn to read the language after enough years. Alignment means decisions have been made somewhere above you. Future state means your present might not be invited. And modernization? That one is a knife wrapped in marketing. Still, I told myself it wasn't about me. I had delivered results. I'd built systems people relied on. My performance reviews were strong. I'd trained half the managers in my division, including the director who now signed off on my work. There was no rational reason to target me. That's what I believed, and that belief is what made the moment hit harder. The invite was called Modernization Alignment, Org Readiness. It was scheduled mid-morning, just after the first wave of email chaos settled. 15 people, a conference room and a remote consultant with a polished smile. HR was running it. That alone told me this wasn't just operational change. When HR runs your meeting, it isn't about tools. It's about people. I walked in early, habit, took the same seat I always took, near the end with a clear view of the screen, not too close to feel like I was competing for attention. Derek, my director, showed up 2 minutes late, laughing at something on his phone as if time belonged to him. He gave me a nod, the kind that says, "We're on the same team," but doesn't include any actual warmth. Marissa from HR stood at the front with a laptop. New HR business partner. New vocabulary. The kind of person who spoke in carefully padded sentences like every phrase had been reviewed by legal in her head before it left her mouth. She started with gratitude. "Thank you all for being here," she said. "This is an exciting step toward modernizing how we work." Exciting. That word should be illegal in corporate. Then the consultant took over, flipping through slides about agility and efficiency and digital first thinking, and I watched the room do what rooms always do. Nod at the right times, laugh at the safe jokes, pretend the future looks like a deck. I wasn't cynical about change. I'd implemented new systems. I'd trained teams. I'd written procedures from scratch. What I was cynical about was the way leadership used change as a cover for decisions they didn't want to defend. Halfway through, Marissa said something that sounded normal. "Next week, we'll begin individual conversations," she said, "to ensure everyone lands in the right place." Right place. Another euphemism. As she spoke, she clicked to open something on her laptop. Maybe the next slide, maybe a new section of the deck. But her screen lagged for a split second. And on the wall-mounted display, big enough for everyone to see, I saw an HR portal window that wasn't the presentation. It was a profile page. My profile page, I recognized it instantly. Same layout as the employee portal we'd rolled out years ago, back when I was on the project team for operational readiness. The header, the tabs, the little empty fields most people ignored. At the top left, my name. Under it, department, job family, tenure. Then a small section titled Something like workforce planning notes. Marissa's cursor flicked. A tab opened, and there it was, typed like it was normal, like it was a neutral, professional classification. Obsolete. Marissa clicked away immediately. Too fast, too smooth. Like someone practiced minimizing mistakes. No one else reacted, or if they did, they hit it well. Derek didn't blink. The consultant kept talking. The room kept nodding, which meant one thing. They either didn't notice, or they already knew. My throat tightened, but not from emotion, from calculation. In my head, a checklist started forming without my permission. Was it a mistake? If it was a mistake, why was it under workforce planning? If it was intentional, who entered it? HR doesn't label someone that way accidentally. And if Derek saw it and didn't flinch, what exactly had he been telling people about me when I wasn't in the room? The meeting ended like nothing happened. People filed out with polite smiles and casual chatter. Derek clapped my shoulder on the way out like we were buddies. "Good session," he said. "We'll need you to help bring the team along." I looked at him and kept my face neutral. "Sure," I said. "Happy to support." I didn't confront him. Not yet. You don't swing at smoke. You swing when you can see the shape of the thing in front of you. Back at my desk, I did what 20 years had trained me to do. I documented time, date, meeting title, attendees. Then I opened my employee portal, not the manager view, not admin access. My own view, what any employee could see. Most people only use the portal to request time off or update their address. I knew there were hidden corners, nested menus, sections built for HR workflows that sometimes leaked into the employee-facing interface. I clicked through everything: profile, role history, performance, training. Then I found it, a small accordion menu under a bland heading about development planning. It took an extra second to load, like it was pulling data from a back-end table most employees never triggered. I clicked, a field appeared, and there it was again. Obsolete. Not big, not dramatic, just present. Like a stain someone forgot to wipe off. I took a screenshot. Then another showing the page header and my name. Then I saved them in 2 places. That might sound paranoid. It wasn't. It was professional. Because I knew what happens next when a company decides you're not aligned. They stop treating you like a person and start treating you like a risk to manage. They rewrite history. They adjust narratives. They turn your work into legacy. They turn your objections into resistance. And if you don't have proof, clean proof, you don't get to argue. You only get to accept. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen while the office noise went on around me. Keyboards, laughter, the distant hum of printers, and a realization settled in with a calm that scared me more than anger would have. They weren't planning to modernize my role. They were planning to modernize me out of existence. I opened a new document and started a timeline. Not emotional, not dramatic. Just facts. Then I sent one email to myself from my work account. Subject line neutral, content brief. Attaching the screenshots. Not as a threat. As a marker. Because I knew something most people learn too late. When HR labels you, it's not the beginning of the story. It's the end they've already written. And the only question left is whether you'll let them write the last page without you. I didn't know it yet, but the next calendar invite would confirm everything. It was already waiting in my inbox. Individual conversation, workforce alignment. 15 minutes. No agenda. Just my name and HR. The next day, I walked into the individual conversation like it was a normal check-in. I wore the same calm face I'd worn in 100 meetings, where people tried to sell bad ideas with good tone. I brought a notebook. I brought questions. I brought the kind of polite professionalism that keeps you from giving them anything they can twist later. Marissa was already seated. Derek joined remotely. Camera on, smile ready, like he'd practiced looking sympathetic in a mirror. The whole thing was scheduled for 15 minutes. That was the first insult. Not the label in the system. Not even the word obsolete. The time slot. Because when you've given a company 2 decades, you don't reduce the end of someone's career to the length of a coffee break unless you've decided their dignity is optional. Marissa started with the soft voice. We want to thank you for your contributions, she said. This is about modernization and ensuring we're aligned with future needs. Future needs, future state, alignment. They were stacking euphemisms like sandbags, hoping none of the truth would leak through. Derek leaned forward on screen. We've identified a path that plays to your strengths, he said. A role that's more stable, less intense. Less intense. That was his word for less important. Marissa shared her screen and slid a document across the meeting chat, a job description. The title was similar enough to sound like continuity, but the content was stripped down like someone had taken a blade to it. No ownership of vendor approvals, no sign-off authority, no direct client contact, no process control, just support, a helper role. They weren't removing my workload, they were removing my position in the system. The trap was obvious. If I accepted the new role, they could say it was a mutual transition, a fit, a choice. And if I didn't accept, they could frame me as resistant to modernization. Marissa smiled. Your base compensation remains the same, she said, like she expected me to feel grateful for the privilege of not being robbed in daylight. But variable compensation will be adjusted to the new band. Adjusted, another polite word for cut. Then Derek delivered the real purpose of the meeting with the casualness of a man who thought he owned the outcome. We'll need you to start knowledge transfer, he said. We've got a modernization lead starting soon, and you're the best person to bring him up to speed. There it was. Train your replacement. They didn't say replacement. They said modernization lead. They didn't say we're pushing you out. They said right-sizing responsibilities. It was the same story every time, just with a new suit on. I looked at the job description again. Then I looked at Derek's face on the screen. I kept my voice even. Who is the modernization lead? I asked. Derek said the name like it was supposed to impress me. Aiden, he replied. He's coming from a larger company. Digital-first background, exactly what we need. So that was the narrative. I was legacy. Aiden was future, and HR was the stage crew making sure the lights were flattering. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't let them see irritation, even though it was climbing up my spine like heat. Instead, I did what people like Derek hate most. I asked for specifics. In writing, I said, I want the scope, the reporting line, the reason for reclassification and the criteria used, and I want confirmation of who owns approval authority for the work I'm currently responsible for. Marissa's smile stiffened for half a second before she recovered. Of course, she said. We'll send a formal letter. Derek's tone changed, subtle but real. You're overthinking this, he said. It's just part of the modernization effort. No, I replied. It's part of my career. Silence. Not long, but long enough to tell me I'd stepped outside the script. They ended the call with more polite language. Derek thanked me for being a team player. Marissa said she appreciated my collaboration. I nodded. I closed my notebook. Then the second the call ended, I did something that gave me my first small sense of control. I opened my email, created a new message, and wrote a recap, not emotional, not accusatory. Just a clean summary of what was said, the reassignment, the changes in responsibilities, the planned start date of the new lead, and the fact that I requested all criteria and justification in writing. I sent it to Marissa and Derek, and I copied legal. That was the micro-catharsis. Not revenge, not a win, just the feeling of the floor under my feet again. Because now it wasn't a hallway conversation. It wasn't he said, she said. It was documented, and documentation changes behavior. Within an hour, Marissa responded. Thank you, she wrote. We will follow up with formal documentation. Derek didn't reply. He never replied when the record got too clear. That afternoon, I did something else. Quietly during lunch, I called an employment attorney, not because I wanted to sue, not because I wanted drama, because I wanted reality. He listened while I described the reassignment, the language, the 15-minute slot, the knowledge transfer demand. Then he said one sentence that landed like a weight. They're trying to get your consent while they still need your brain. I asked what I should do next. He told me to keep everything in writing, to avoid signing anything under pressure, and to make sure approval authority and accountability were clear, because companies love to remove your authority while keeping your name attached to the risk. I hung up and stared at my desk for a moment, watching people walk by, laughing, carrying snacks, arguing about harmless things. They didn't know. They didn't know my file said obsolete, and they didn't know a replacement was already scheduled to arrive. And I almost told myself I could fix this by being reasonable, by being helpful, by proving my value one more time. Then Derek sent a new email. Subject line, transition plan. Short message, no greeting. Please create a knowledge transfer schedule for Aiden's first 2 weeks. We need you to be proactive. He wasn't asking. He was assigning, as if my future was already decided, and my only remaining role was to make their decision smoother. I stared at the email, and I felt the irritation finally sharpen into something cleaner. Not rage, clarity. I opened a blank document and started writing a transition plan like a professional. Deliverables, dependencies, systems access, approvals needed, risks if mismanaged. And at the very bottom, I added one line that looked harmless if you didn't know how corporations work. I will begin transfer once my role scope, authority, and separation terms are confirmed in writing. I sent it. Derek replied 10 minutes later. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I read it twice. Then I typed back one sentence. I'm making it accurate. I hit send. And that's when I realized something else. Something Derek and Marissa didn't understand because they'd never needed to. When you label someone obsolete, you don't just insult them. You activate them. Because people like me don't break loudly. We build quietly. And on Monday morning, Aiden would walk in expecting a warm handoff. He wouldn't know he was stepping into a trap that Derek built himself. But that was just the beginning. Aiden showed up Monday morning wearing the kind of confidence that comes from being hired as a solution. New laptop, new badge, new smile. He shook hands like he'd been trained to look people in the eye for exactly the right amount of time. Really glad to meet you, he said. I've heard you're the guy who keeps everything running. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was accurate. That was my entire problem. I wasn't visible enough to be celebrated, but I was essential enough to be used. Welcome, I told him. I'll get you oriented. I kept it professional. I didn't treat him like an enemy. He wasn't the one who typed obsolete into my file. He was just the beneficiary of it. I gave him the basics first. Where our systems lived, who the true decision makers were, which vendors required extra scrutiny, and which clients had hidden compliance clauses that could blow up an account if you missed a single step. He nodded fast, typing notes like a man who believes speed equals competence. Then, on his first afternoon, he asked a question that explained why Derek hired him. So, Aiden said, lowering his voice slightly, what's the fastest way to streamline approvals? Because Derek wants fewer bottlenecks. Bottlenecks. That's what they called controls when they wanted to remove them. I didn't lecture. I didn't scare him. I just answered the way you answer when you've seen the cost of shortcuts. The approval chain exists because we've been burned before, I said. If you want to change it, you need the client requirements in front of you and the audit history behind you. Aiden smiled politely. Got it, he said. We'll modernize it. Modernize. The word again. On Tuesday, the first crack appeared. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of crack you only notice if you know where the pressure sits. A vendor emailed me directly, not through the normal distribution list. Hey, the vendor wrote. We didn't get your sign-off in the system, so we're proceeding under the new guidance. Please advise if that's incorrect. I stared at the email and felt a cold familiarity. I wasn't being asked to approve. I was being positioned as a scapegoat. So I checked the system, and there it was. My name removed from the approval routing. Not from a team list. Not from a friendly directory. From the actual control path that protected our largest client account from unauthorized changes. Someone had quietly edited the workflow so that approvals now routed to Aiden, which meant if something went wrong, the company could say they transitioned ownership, and if a client escalated, they could say the old model was legacy and the new model was modern. It was clean, quiet, and dangerous. I walked to Derek's office. He was on a call, laughing into a headset. When he saw me at the door, he muted himself and waved me in with that irritated patience executives use when they think your questions are interruptions, not warnings. "What's up?" he asked. I held my voice steady. "I'm off the approval routing," I said. "Who approved that change?" He didn't look surprised. That was the moment I understood. The obsolete tag wasn't a label, it was a plan. "We're empowering the modernization team," Derek said. "Aiden needs autonomy if we want progress. You'll be focusing on support." Support. That word again, like it was a soft landing instead of a shove. "I need that confirmed in writing," I said, "because my name is on the historical controls. If I don't have authority, I can't be accountable." Derek sighed like I was being difficult. "You're making this bigger than it is," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm making it accurate." He stared at me for a second, then shrugged. "Send Marissa a note," he said. "We'll align." Align. Another synonym for stop asking. I left his office without raising my voice. The anger was there, but it was controlled, pushed down into a place where it became useful instead of messy. Back at my desk, I did the thing Derek wanted to avoid. I made it official. I sent an email to Derek and Marissa. I wrote that, as of today, I had been removed from approval routing for specific workflows. I requested written confirmation of who now held approval authority, and I stated clearly that I could not be held responsible for approvals I was no longer authorized to give. I copied legal, not as a threat, as a safety measure. The reply came from Marissa first, short, vague. "We're evolving ownership as part of modernization," she wrote. "Thank you for your flexibility." Flexibility. That word is a trap. Vague answers are traps, too, because vagueness is how they keep options open when they want to blame you later. I replied, politely asking for a named approver and a date. No name came. On Wednesday, the client escalation hit. Fast, sharp, and completely predictable. A routine audit request came in. That request was supposed to be simple. We had a standard packet we send every quarter, compliance confirmations, approval logs, a few specific sign-offs that proved we weren't freelancing with controls. I had built that packet years ago. Every time auditors asked why, I had an answer. Every time they asked where, I knew exactly which folder and which log. Aiden assembled the packet himself. He missed one requirement, a small one, a detail that looked optional if you didn't know the history. The requirement had been added after a near miss the previous year, when a client almost paused the contract until we proved we had a control in place. Aiden didn't know that. No one had told him, because telling him would require acknowledging that the legacy guy wasn't just old, he was the map. The client caught the omission within an hour. Their compliance lead replied with one sentence that made my stomach tighten. "This packet is incomplete. Please advise if your control environment has changed." That's corporate language for, "We don't trust you." And when a client doesn't trust you, the money starts looking for a safer place to live. Derek appeared at my desk 15 minutes later. Not emailing, not scheduling, appearing. He leaned in slightly, voice low. "Can you jump on a call?" he asked. "Just help stabilize this." I looked up at him and held his gaze. "Who owns audit responses now?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "Don't do this," he said. "I'm not doing anything," I replied. "I'm following the operating model you set." Silence. It wasn't long, but it was real. Then Derek said the words he hated saying to me now. "Fine," he muttered. "You do?" I joined the call. I didn't grandstand. I didn't shame Aiden. I didn't humiliate anyone. I did what I'd done for 20 years. I protected the company from the consequences of its own arrogance. I explained the missing requirement to the client calmly. I referenced the previous near miss without making it sound like panic. I gave them the corrected documentation within the hour. I made them feel safe again, and it worked. The client's tone softened. "Thank you," they said. "Please ensure this doesn't happen again." After the call, Derek didn't thank me. He just nodded once, as if my competence was an inconvenience he'd been forced to accept. Aiden stood nearby, eyes lowered, embarrassed. I didn't rub it in. I walked back to my desk, opened my email, and sent a clean summary to the entire chain. Derek, Marissa, legal, and the client liaison. I listed what had been missed, why it mattered, and what needed to be in place to prevent it again. Then I ended the email with a sentence that was both true and quietly lethal. Approval authority and accountability must remain aligned to protect the client. That was my micro-catharsis. Not the call, not the fix. The fact that for the first time since the obsolete label, I had forced reality into writing where they couldn't smooth it out with tone. Marissa replied within minutes. "Thank you for being collaborative," she wrote. Collaborative, again. Derek didn't reply. He never replied when the record made him look small. That night, the formal letter arrived in my inbox. Not a demotion, it said, a modernization reassignment. And then I read the justification line, one line buried in corporate language, that turned my controlled irritation into something colder. It claimed my recent performance had fallen behind evolving expectations. A lie, a quiet one, the kind they use later, the kind that sticks to you if you don't scrape it off immediately. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't rise. I just opened a new email and started attaching documents. My performance reviews, the client saves, Derek's own praise emails. Then I wrote one sentence. "Please correct the record. If you cannot, confirm in writing that this justification is inaccurate." I hit send, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a man being pushed out. I felt like a man being activated, because I realized something simple. They weren't modernizing my role. They were rewriting my history to justify removing me, and if they were willing to forge the story, then the next steps wouldn't be about respect. They would be about leverage. A few minutes later, my calendar refreshed. A new invite appeared. Subject, legal review call. Time, tomorrow morning. Attendees, Marissa, and legal. Derek wasn't on it, which meant he'd sent someone else to clean up the mess he'd made, and that was the moment I knew the real fight hadn't started yet. The legal review call was scheduled for the next morning, early enough that it felt intentional, like they wanted me tired, rushed, and grateful. I wasn't. I'd slept the way you sleep when your brain finally stops negotiating with reality. I joined from my desk with my camera on and my notebook open, not to perform, to remember. The attorney introduced herself with a calm voice and a careful smile. Marissa was there too, posture perfect, expression polite, like this was a routine alignment discussion. It wasn't. The attorney started with the softest version of control. "We want to ensure the transition is handled appropriately," she said. "There may have been some phrasing concerns in the documentation." Phrasing concerns. That's what they call a lie when they want to fix it without admitting it. Marissa jumped in immediately. "We value you," she said. "This is about supporting you through change." Supporting me? By labeling me obsolete and rewriting my performance record, I kept my voice even. "I want the record corrected," I said, "and I want clarity on authority and accountability. I also want to discuss separation terms if this reassignment is not voluntary." There was a pause. The attorney's eyes sharpened slightly, not aggressive, evaluative. Marissa's smile tightened. "That's not where we are," Marissa said. "We're just..." The attorney lifted a hand, gently stopping her. "Let's hear him out," she said. That was the first real sign that someone in the room understood risk. I laid it out cleanly, like an operations brief. The justification line in the letter was false. I had documented performance history. I had saved the client escalation that occurred after they removed my approval authority. I had proof of the obsolete label inside their own system, visible through my employee portal view. Marissa blinked once at the last part, not confusion, alarm. The attorney asked, "Can you elaborate on the label?" So I did. I described the meeting title, the screen share moment, the portal section, the exact placement of the word. I told them I had screenshots showing my name and the field value. There was a silence so clean it felt like a vacuum. Then the attorney said carefully, "Please forward those screenshots to me directly." Marissa tried to regain control. "That label could be internal shorthand," she said. "It doesn't." "It does," the attorney cut in, still polite. "We'll review." Marissa went quiet, and that was my micro-catharsis. Hearing the HR tone drop away when the conversation moved from feelings to liability, because the moment you put a word like obsolete next to a long-tenured employee in a workforce planning system, while running a modernization program, you create a story no company wants to explain under oath. The attorney switched tactics. "We want to find a constructive path," she said. "If we correct the language and clarify role ownership, are you willing to proceed with transition support?" That was the offer. Fix the paper, keep the knowledge transfer, and hope I stop pushing. I didn't get emotional. I didn't gloat. I treated it like a business negotiation because that's what it had become. "I'm willing to support a transition under terms," I said. "Those terms include a corrected record, clear authority alignment, and compensation for knowledge transfer, if it extends beyond standard duties. And if this reassignment is being used to reduce my role without my consent, I want a severance option." Marissa exhaled sharply through her nose like she was irritated. I knew how this works. The attorney didn't flinch. She asked, "What terms?" I stated them plainly. A defined separation package option, neutral reference language, continued benefits for a defined period, and a written statement that my performance had not declined. No dramatics, just structure. Marissa tried again. "That's not standard," she said. I replied, "Neither is removing approval authority and then expecting me to carry accountability for client risk." Another pause. And then the attorney said something that changed the room. "We'll review internally and respond in writing. In other words, stop talking. Start assessing damage." I forwarded the screenshots to the attorney immediately from my work email with a short note. As discussed, clean chain. Then I waited. Not passively, strategically, because I knew something else now. If legal was involved this early, it meant one thing. Someone had finally noticed that Derek's plan wasn't just disrespectful, it was dangerous. That afternoon, chaos arrived right on schedule. Aiden pushed a workflow change, not because he was reckless, because Derek wanted speed. Derek wanted bottlenecks removed. Derek wanted to prove modernization was working. Aiden removed one approval checkpoint and consolidated routing under his role, assuming it was streamlining. It triggered a reporting discrepancy in the client dashboard. One of those issues that looks small internally but looks like a breach to the outside world. The client noticed first. They always do. Their compliance lead sent an email to Derek, copying executives I'd never been included with. Subject line, immediate concern. Control variance detected. The body was short. That's how you know it's serious. We are pausing new transactions until we receive a satisfactory explanation and corrective action plan. Pausing transactions. That is how money tells you it's about to leave. Within minutes, Derek's tone changed across the building. People started walking fast. Meetings got canceled. New meetings appeared like pop-up warnings. Then my phone rang. Derek. Not an email, not a calendar invite. A call. His voice was tight, like he'd swallowed pride, and it didn't sit well. "We need you," he said. Can you help us stabilize? Just for a bit. Just for a bit. The phrase people use when they're desperate but still want to feel in control. I looked at my screen. The client email, the executive list. The word paused. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just understood the leverage had shifted from theoretical to real. I'm willing, I said, under a consulting agreement. Silence on the line. What? Derek asked, as if the idea offended him. You removed my authority, I said calmly. You reassigned my role. You documented false performance language. If you want my direct intervention now, it needs to be formal, compensated, and scoped. And I need written authority for whatever I'm responsible for. Derek swallowed. We can't do that overnight, he said. You already created the emergency overnight, I replied. I'm offering a solution. Another pause. Then he said, quieter, send terms. I did. Not inflated fantasy. Realistic terms grounded in urgency. A short-term contract. An hourly rate that reflected critical risk. Defined scope. And a requirement that approvals route through me for the specific workflow until the client signed off on corrective controls. I copied the attorney. Because now it wasn't just operations, it was legal risk management. Within 2 hours, the consulting agreement was signed. No ceremony. No apology. Just signatures. And then I went to work. I pulled logs. I identified the exact change that caused the variance. I created a corrective action plan with concrete steps, owners, and deadlines. I restored the approval checkpoint with documented controls. I drafted the client communication in a tone that acknowledged concern without admitting wrongdoing. Aiden sat beside me, quiet, watching the speed and precision like he was seeing the real job for the first time. At one point, he whispered, I didn't realize it was this interconnected. It always is, I said. That's why controls exist. We delivered the plan to the client the same day. The next morning, the client lifted the pause conditionally, pending verification. That was the second micro-catharsis, watching the money start moving again because my name was back where it mattered, not in a title, but in a control path. And then the internal consequences start. Marissa stopped showing up to meetings, not announced, not explained, just not there. The attorney was suddenly present everywhere, like a shadow. Derek became careful. He stopped sending casual messages. He stopped making jokes. He started asking for confirmation in writing. Because when legal enters the room, bravado becomes a liability. By Friday, a new email thread appeared, one I'd never been included in before. It was addressed to leadership and the board liaison. Subject line, workforce planning audit. Terminology and risk. I wasn't copied, but I didn't need to be. Because the attorney called me an hour later and said, we need to discuss final resolution. Final resolution, not alignment, not future state, resolution. Which meant they had finally accepted that the easiest way to reduce risk wasn't to modernize me out, it was to settle cleanly and stop digging. I closed my laptop, walked to the window, and looked out over the parking lot where people came and went, like nothing had changed. Inside, everything had changed. They had tried to label me obsolete. Now they were trying to price the cost of that label. And the next message I received would decide whether this ended with humiliation or with peace. The attorneys scheduled the final call for Monday morning. Not with Marissa, not with Derek, just legal. That told me everything I needed to know about what had happened behind closed doors over the weekend. When I joined, the attorney didn't waste time on gratitude or corporate warmth. Her voice was professional, controlled, and slightly fatigued, the tone of someone who'd spent 2 days explaining a problem to people who hated hearing it. We want to resolve this cleanly, she said, in writing, with no ambiguity. No ambiguity. That was the first honest phrase I'd heard in weeks. She laid out what they were offering. A corrected letter, fully corrected, not phrasing adjusted. A written statement that the performance justification language was inaccurate, and would not be used in any internal or external reference. A separation package with a defined term, continued benefits for a defined period, a neutral reference clause, and a non-disparagement provision that went both ways. Mutual. That mattered more than people realize. It's the difference between being treated as a problem and being treated as a professional exit. Then she added the final piece, almost casually. And we'd like to continue your consulting engagement for a limited time to ensure stability during the transition. They weren't asking me to train my replacement anymore. They were asking me to stabilize the damage they caused by trying to rush the replacement into power. I listened without reacting. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel rage. I felt something calmer, something I hadn't felt since I saw that word on the screen. I felt control. I'll agree under 2 conditions, I said. 1. The written record is corrected exactly as described, signed and stored. 2. The consulting scope stays limited to controls and client stabilization, with authority for approvals, in that scope until the client signs off. The attorney agreed without arguing, because at this point, arguing wasn't a strategy, it was risk. We finalized the paperwork that day. I signed it at my desk, the same desk where I'd spent years making sure other people's messes didn't become disasters. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't take a victory lap. I just made sure every clause was clear. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I took a slow breath. The next morning, I walked into the building not as an employee trying to prove value, but as a consultant with a defined scope and a defined end date. That shift changes how you hold your shoulders. It changes how you hear people talk to you. It changes what you tolerate. Derek was different immediately. He wasn't loud anymore. He wasn't casual. He didn't clap my shoulder or call me a team player. He asked questions carefully, like each one might become an exhibit later. I want to make sure we're aligned, he said, using the word again, but this time it sounded like fear. We will be, I replied, as long as we stay inside the scope. Aiden approached me mid-week, looking less polished than his first day. I didn't know what they were doing, he said quietly, with the label, with the narrative. I believed him. He was ambitious, not malicious. He'd been sold a story and handed the consequences. I'm not here to punish you, I told him, but you need to understand something. Modernizing isn't replacing people. It's replacing fragility. If you remove controls just to feel fast, you don't become modern. You become reckless. He nodded once, like the words landed heavier than advice. That afternoon, the client signed off on the corrective action plan. Conditional approval lifted fully. The money was flowing again. The crisis was officially over. And that's when the company did what companies always do when the danger passes. They looked for someone to blame. It just wasn't going to be me. Because my emails were clean. My warnings were documented. My approvals were scoped and authorized. The workflow change that caused the pause had a name attached to it, and the decision trail led upward, not downward. 2 weeks later, Derek asked me for 5 minutes. He stood in his doorway like a man rehearsing humility. I wish it hadn't gone this way, he said. I didn't respond with anger. I responded with truth. You didn't wish that, I said calmly. You wished it would go quietly. His face tightened, not in rage, more like discomfort at being seen clearly. I did what I thought was necessary, he said. That's the problem, I replied. You didn't think about consequences. You thought about image. He had nothing to say to that because there isn't a clever corporate response to a clean diagnosis. A month later, my consulting term ended exactly as planned. No extensions, no last-minute pleading, no late-night emergencies. Because the controls were restored, the client was stable, and the new operating model had been forced to respect reality instead of marketing. On my final day, I didn't carry a box through the lobby. I carried a folder, thin, boring, precise, the signed agreements, the corrected letter, the scope documents, the final client sign-off. It wasn't sentimental. It was closure. As I left, I passed the conference room where the Modernization Alignment meeting had happened. The same screen, the same chairs, the same corporate air conditioning that always felt slightly too cold. For a second, I remembered how my stomach had dropped when I saw that word, obsolete. And then I realized something that surprised me. I didn't feel humiliation anymore. I felt relief, because the label had done me a favor. It showed me the truth early enough to act. It forced me to stop trying to earn respect from people who saw employees as inventory. And it pushed me into a decision I'd been postponing for years, to stop tying my identity to a company that could erase me with a field value. A few weeks after I left, a former colleague texted me. "Derek's gone," it said. Board asked for accountability after the client pause. They called it leadership failure. I read it once and set my phone down. No thrill, no gloating, just the clean math of consequences. Because that's what karma looks like in corporate life. Not flames, not shouting, paper trails, risk events, board questions, quiet exits. As for me, I took the work I'd always done, the unglamorous, critical work, and I built something around it that belonged to me. I started consulting independently, focused on audit readiness and control design for mid-sized companies that didn't have the luxury of learning lessons the hard way. Within one season, I was booked, not because I chased revenge, because people trust someone who doesn't panic, doesn't posture, and can prove what he says. That's the part nobody understands until it's too late. You can call a man obsolete. You can type it into a system and pretend it's just workforce planning. But if he's the one holding the controls together, the only thing you modernize by removing him is your own risk. They tried to erase me politely. Instead, they paid to keep me, then paid to let me go, then paid again to rebuild what they thought they could replace. And I walked away with the only thing that actually matters after 20 years of giving your life to a place. My name clean, my record corrected, my future mine.